Jose Aldo, and he does these media scrums down in Brazil from time to time, and I always run to go listen to him because we don't hear a lot from Jose Aldo, which, that's a separate subject, but I think that's terrible. I really wish that Aldo would do more interviews with the U.S. media because I think he's a world-class talent, obviously. I mean, I'm not alone in that, of course. And I just wish that he would talk a little bit more because I think it would get him in those big marquee matchups that he really wants. And it would just – I want people to know this guy. I want casual fans to know Jose Aldo, and they don't for the most part. And I think it's because, he disappears into Brazil and no one hears about him. But here's what he said.
They know him strictly as the guy who got knocked out in 13 seconds by Conor McGregor.
Unfortunately, a whole lot of casual fight fans see Aldo in that way, which is tragic if you really think about it. But here's what Aldo said recently. Speaking about, I don't want to read this entire quote. He basically says that he doesn't think McGregor-Mayweather is going to happen just because Mayweather is used to certain business structure, which does not exist, obviously, with the UFC. It's very different. He also says... he was asked about, a rematch, a potential rematch, of course, with McGregor. And at first he says never. And then I think he kind of backtracks and he says, I think it was close at one point, but, it didn't happen. And he's running from me. He won't accept it. We'll see. That's essentially what Aldo says. My question to you is he right about either one? He's saying that he doesn't think McGregor-Mayweather will happen. He also mostly does not think that Aldo McGregor 2 will ever happen. Is he right?
I don't think he's right on the first part at this point. Now, I would have said, obviously, just like probably you and everybody else, that the McGregor-Mayweather fight was a long shot. But as we kind of go further into this, and you've got the UFC now talking about themselves, and you feel like there's facility there for, that they might get this thing done that everybody wants to see happen at this point. So to me, I feel like that fight will happen, maybe not this year, but I think it's going to be put together. My bigger question, though, in terms of your second part is, will Aldo ever fight him again? He's probably right about that never happening. I have my concerns mostly because I feel like Conor McGregor, let's just say that he goes and he fights Mayweather and he gets somewhere in the neighborhood of the 9-figure range, okay? This is something that would be unprecedented for any MMA fighter, regardless, going into that type of situation to get that kind of payday. I'm not even sure in what form or if he returns to the UFC. I mean, I don't know how the UFC then reconciles bringing him back to fight these ordinary fights because I think he's went about as crazy into the fight world as you can at that point, having done what he's done and fought, going against Mayweather. So it'd be really interesting to see where his mindset is. I feel like he's a guy who, as long as things are escalating, as long as they're moving upward, he's all about it. But as soon as it has to come back down, it becomes a different kind of proposition. Unfortunately, Aldo, I can't even imagine he's on his radar at this point. And I feel like poor Jose Aldo, I agree with you about him. I wish he'd get more exposure in the States, but I feel like he's always a little bit behind the news curve as to what's going on. I think he's looking at it from a perspective of that the UFC is still kind of a dictatorship in these ways, but I don't think he quite understands how much Conor McGregor is calling his own shots or influencing, action at this point in the UFC. So, I think we're going to get. I think he's wrong about the Mayweather fight at this point, but I think that he's right about he's never going to see him again.
Yeah, I think if I had one wish in the fight game, oh man, I mean, we could go down a rabbit hole with that. Yeah. But if I could have a genie and say you get one wish in the fight game, something's going to happen, I would love Aldo to go, and I've said this before, I would love him to go on a McGregor hunt. I would love him to say that my career cannot conclude without me rectifying that situation. That was one night that has now come to define my entire legacy, and I am not going to accept that. And I think that if he did that, and he did it in such a way that he's like, I will kill anything and everything that I need to on my way back to redemption on this. Like, I am not going to let this die, and it's basically the way Conor used Aldo and his dominance as his storyline coming up, that he was going to go knock out Aldo and it was going to happen and everybody needed to be, it always had that light at the end of the tunnel that this is the direction that Conor is heading in, and every time he took a step closer, it was exciting.
Right.
And I think that Aldo could flip that script and say, I am going after McGregor now. I'm chasing him because of what happened in 13 seconds, And I think fans would really get behind that.
at this point, too, I feel like it's not about titles for Jose Aldo so much as it would be about that rematch, because I agree with you 100% that he's been marred in this strange, like, McGregor just went right through him, did away with 10 years of dominance in the game, which is insane to me. So if I'm Jose Aldo, that does become my number one goal. I hope he does do that. I felt like for just a little bit there he was going to do that, but I think he needs to up. He's going to have to up that. He's going to have to up the heat a little bit, because I honestly. Yeah, he's going to have to. I mean, the bottom line with yeah, I know you're right. He's going to have to. He's got to make an inferno, because the bottom line is. I don't know where. I feel like it's a sweepstakes at this point, and it's really difficult to know where McGregor will land when he's done with this whole Mayweather thing. It's very, very difficult. But Jose Aldo has one of the most compelling reasons to get that fight. So if I'm him, I'm vying for that, not just for the payday, but for that redemption.
Yeah, unfortunately, though. His comments just run counter to that, and I'm not saying that he doesn't want the fight, but he's not saying anything that really makes you think he definitely wants it. When they have a scrum and the mics are in his face and he's asked about Conor and he says, "Oh, he's running, he's scared, I don't think he'll ever fight me." Like, okay, yeah, I mean I guess that's sort of something that you can say, but it ain't working, Jose. That's not getting you that fight, man. So. I don't know, man. He's got to. It's what you said. He's got to turn up the heat a lot. Yeah. He's got to crank that thing. I mean, you can say whatever you want, but every time a mic is put in front of your face, you should talk about Conor McGregor. And I know that probably stings, because he probably does internally say, well, why do I need to chase this guy? Like, I look at everything that I did. But if he does care about his legacy. I mean, I'll remember him as a great fighter. I'll remember him as one of my absolute favorite fighters to cover of all time. But history in large, won't be so kind to Aldo, and I think that's a shame. Headline number 4, weight cutting, not a new issue. We spoke about it last week. I think we spoke about it the week before that. It's affecting this sport on a weekly basis, it seems like, and. When I was talking to Kevin Iole last week, we were talking about, what is going to fix this eventually and how long is that going to take? Well, Andy Foster, who is the executive officer of the California State Athletic Commission, he is doing something about it. And the way in which I asked him, I said, is California now at a point in essentially that there's no turning back? I mean, they've crossed that line where they are going to address this. Like they are going to significantly reform their policies and make sure that this is not happening in their state. Because we always kind of talk about like, people really want to do this, but there's so much. It's such a long process to get anything done and to change statutes and to change the way people think and to educate people about this. So it's just like, I mean, people can talk about it, but it's so far down the road that we're ever going to see a change. What Andy Foster is suggesting, he's submitting a 10-point plan to the commission that, speaking to him, I get the sense that he has a lot of confidence that this thing is going to pass. And it's going to do things like licensing fighters by specific weight class, having physicians look at these guys prior to licensing them to determine, is this a safe weight class for you to compete in? And I got to say, Chuck, if a doctor starts to talk to these guys and says, wait, you weigh what? And you want to fight at what? A lot of those are going to come back negative. They're going to say, no, it's not safe for you to cut down.
For sure, yeah.
So we are going to see a situation in which California is going to be off on its own, not licensing fighters in their divisions that they're competing in everywhere else.
Yeah.
What do you make of this, and what's going to happen with this?
Well, what I like about it is, what's the old saying, be bold and mighty forces will come to your aid. I feel like that's been Andy Foster, who recognizes something that we've long recognized. I think anybody who covers this sport, you see, these fighters essentially, devastating themselves during fight week to basically make this weight. Now, we've seen this so often that it becomes old hat when this gaunt figure is standing on a scale and we're like, oh, he made weight. It's just, you just discount the amount of hell he just put his body through to get there. And I think that, I think it was you. I was watching you one time say, like, at some point we will look back on these days and think, what were we thinking? Was this you who was saying, like, you see the old goalies in hockey and they're not wearing any kind of face protection or head protection? You think, wow, that's insane. That's insane Yeah. It's insane to contemplate that ever happened. I think that we will, at some point in time, hopefully sooner rather than later, look back at the extreme practice of this massive weight cutting in such short periods of time to fit some rigid idea of a weight structure, and the way that the contracts and everything, just to keep a fight. I still remember, going to the first time I really seen it. I was when I was first, really covering the sport was UFC 82 when Dan Henderson was fighting, and I was kind of shadowing him in Columbus, and I remember him cutting weight, just doing all his stuff and just pouring rivers out of his his plastic, his plastic suit and things. And you're thinking, this is crazy, man. I didn't realize how much these guys go through just to go through the hell. They go through hell just to get into the fight itself, and seeing him afterward, he overshot his mark by a couple pounds and showed up sluggish. And afterwards, he was immediately like, I didn't feel like myself out there. And he immediately attributed it to that weight cut taking it out of him. You know what I mean? And thinking it's crazy that we're seeing guys do harm to themselves in the competitive sense, where they're not even showing up in their best versions of themselves. And then you see guys like Kelvin Gastelum, obviously, who's forced at some point to try a different weight class, and he's successful. Donald Cerrone, going up into a weight class, successful, those types of things, and you think, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? So to me, long story short, I see this very, this 10-point plan, which is obviously very audacious. It has a major, there's stuff in there that you're like, I can't imagine